The Boys has been on for years now, and it's one of the biggest shows of the decade. It's everywhere for its eccentric characters and quotables. Not knowing what happens in the show seems like an incredibly difficult task. I say that having not watched any of the show until approximately 5 weeks ago. It never seemed like my thing, with the gore fest and the sex jokes that left me thinking, yeah, I get it. But when Invincible ended, I was bored, and I had seen clips recently that convinced me that the show might have at least something to offer. I tossed on episode 1 and quickly worked my way through season 1 after that. Then I figured, since I enjoyed myself enough, I would get through season 2 as well. People had said when that one came out that it was a drop in quality, but I was surprised that I liked it just as much as the first season, if not more. And by that point, I had basically committed to catching up and experiencing the big bloody finale with the rest of the fans. Calling them fans, though, is a bit of a stretch. The Boys subreddit is basically a hate forum by this point because the show had a drop in quality after season 4. And I'll admit, this is true, season 4 was the most inconsistent season. But it wasn't horrible, and neither was this season either, even though the fanbase will have you convinced that it shot their dog and fucked their wife. How is it really, though? Let's talk about that. Most of this is going to be about the finale, but there are 7 episodes beforehand to cover, and that's where a lot of my issues lie. As many have mentioned, Season 5 had a lot more filler than you'd expect, weird subplots and cameos that wouldn't have been an issue in just any old season, but are quite a conundrum for a final season that only has 8 episodes to work with. Take an episode like One-Shots. I actually think the Firecracker segment of this episode is genuinely fantastic, and by far the best character work that she got in the entire show. I wish that took up more of the episode. However, that part is instead reserved for Black Noir's acting career and Butcher's dog fucking Homelander. I'll actually forgive Noir's part, because I had a lot of fun with it, but what was with Terror, is that really the funniest thing in the world? Hell, I'd actually go so far to say that the Homelander and Soldier Boy part of the episode is also unneeded. It was funny and all, but that whole 20-minute set piece with Mr. Marathon resulted in nothing. They already thought Bombsight might have what they need from the previous episode. Now they know that he definitely does, and that is the entirety of what they learned from this interaction. This much meandering in the final season is sort of ridiculous, and I actually think a lot of that is due to what Eric Kripke pulled in the very first episode of the season, which was killing A-Train. A-Train is probably the best character in the entire series due to his redemption arc and Jesse T. Usher's charisma. I actually do understand the decision to kill him immediately as a sort of nobody safe type thing, and the scene itself is done greatly, even if he's in surprisingly little of his final episode. But what that led to was the removal of the series' most interesting character with some of the best dynamics with the rest of the cast. The fact that we never got to see Annie, Huey, and A-Train in the same room working together is a major detriment to the season. Him alongside the Boys would have been the most unique thing about the entire season. But because he gets murked so quickly, everything just feels very typical. The other biggest problem with this season is continued from the 4th, which is the dialogue and general reliance on vulgarity as a crutch. And I'm not saying here that The Boys hasn't always been violent, because that would be so inaccurate it's hilarious. This show is extremely R-rated and bloody. But with time, the shock value wore off, and now the gore and sex feels like nothing. Instead of moving on from that type of stuff, the writers kicked it up a notch in Season 4. Originally, all the disgusting sexual stuff was meant to show how ridiculous and awful the character engaging in it was. It was mostly the 7 who were gross weirdos, along with Butcher. But from Season 4 onwards, everyone just talks like this. Like, was there any reason for Victoria Newman, a character who has always been pragmatic despite her villainy, talking about eating AOC's ass? Not to mention the fact that she is literally based off of AOC, which makes AOC existing in the Boys universe very weird, but let's not get into that conversation. In Season 5, it's Frenchie and Kamiko who get hit especially hard with the Vivzy Pop laser, which makes their already boring scenes now worthy of skipping entirely. It's not just the dialogue, though, because the show also loves to do weird sexual stuff on screen for no reason. Again, this has always been in the show, yet some of its worst moments are in the final 2 seasons. The entire episode devoted to Huey getting sexually assaulted by Tech Knight is, without a doubt, the worst episode of the whole series that I've seen. That's a Season 4 one, but in Season 5 we have the laziest sex joke the writers have ever come up with, which is an old dude that uses his balls as a lasso. And you might ask, why is that the worst one of all? Well, that's because they literally already fucking did this with the character Love Sausage, but they killed him, so I guess they needed a new weird dick guy. Impressive work, Emmy Award-winning series The Boys. So the season wasn't going great. Individually, I actually think almost every episode was quite good, but as a whole, it wasn't coming together. Episode 7 ended up being the lowest rated on IMDb because of review bombing, even though it wasn't much different from the rest of the episodes, and going into the finale, it seemed like everybody just decided to hate it before it was even out. But I didn't decide that, and I also didn't hate it. The finale was actually pretty good, if not a little cookie cutter. Let's first touch on some of the less important events that went down. Sister Sage gets her exit from the show pretty early on in the episode when she triggers Kimiko's new powers that have been instilled in her using the Soldier Boy experiments in the last episode. Sage purposely erasing her own powers does seem like a logical end to her story, given that she clearly does hate being so aware of everything. I would seriously challenge her getting a redemption arc, though, given that she reinforced Homelander in Season 4 to become an even worse version of himself and to create literal concentration camps, but if we're gonna do one, this is a pretty good way to do it. Her learning about the concept of love, which is the only thing she cannot understand in the previous episode, was actually a really interesting idea. Maybe if they gave themselves more time with it, it could have played out better, but whatever. We also say goodbye to O-Father, Daveed Diggs' character, when he gets killed by MM. People were actually mad about this quote-unquote unceremonious death, which is pretty funny because O-Father was an almost entirely unserious character who had only appeared in a recurring role for one season. Daveed Diggs was apparently just so charismatic in this role that he caused everyone to actually care about him. I, for one, thought his death was a perfect way for him to go out. His power reverberating back into his own head is so damn creative. Ashley also gets her moment to finally leave Vought behind after years of cowardice, and it's pretty nice to see, but that scene pales in comparison to the one that follows after the climax where we see her declaration that she did nothing wrong on TV, only to hard cut to the funniest fucking photo of her in a cop car. That was probably my biggest laugh of the entire final episode. All of this was just obstacles, though, on the pathway to the final fight, where the boys take on Homelander. Right before this, we get a fun villain speech from Homie himself, where he drops the genuinely raw-ass line that he will be the god of the ashes. Cool and all, but this does follow with him immediately getting his ass kicked. Kimiko Soldier Boy blasting Homelander is a solid way for him to lose, though I have some notes. First of all, Kimiko getting the kill just doesn't work for me. Yes, I know Butcher is who finished the job, but Kimiko did 99% of the damage, and she has no personal relationship with Homelander. I mean, she doesn't like him, but that's about all there is to it. This also was just set up in the last episode, so it feels a bit abrupt. However, people had been talking about Soldier Boy doing the same thing to Homelander ever since Season 3, so in a way, it's been brewing for a while. On top of that, I love that it's not just Homelander, but Ryan and Butcher as well who lose their powers from this. It makes it feel more realistic, since they had to sacrifice their own abilities in order to keep him down. This leaves Homelander vulnerable to being taken out by Butcher, which is nice, though I still personally think that Ryan getting the kill would have been the better choice. He gets shafted pretty hard in this last season, and him avenging his mom and defying the possibility of becoming like his dad would have made up for that. I like Ryan losing his powers and rejecting Butcher because those are both things that I think will make him safer and happier in his future, but the Homelander kill would have been the cherry on top. Nonetheless, Butcher finally gets what he's been waiting for. Depowered Homelander turns extremely fruity in his last scene as Anthony Starr pitches himself up like a full octave to beg for his life on TV, because he really is as good comedically as he is dramatically. Then Butcher kills him by crowbarring open his head. And that's about it. As I said, cookie cutter. Like, I did enjoy this ending, and Homelander revealing himself to be a wimpy little loser on TV broadcasting to the whole country makes a lot of sense, but it was about exactly what we all expected. Homelander dead, Butcher dead, which we'll get to in a bit. Even Deep died, which was kinda sad. Homelander even lampshades that Deep should survive because he wants him to understand how pathetic he is, but he dies. And the funny thing is, everybody said that it would either be Annie who killed him, or the ocean. Apparently it really was that predictable, because it was both. I was feeling pretty lukewarm on this until I realized that there was still 20 minutes left, and in my opinion, this is when the finale gets real good. Butcher decides to follow through on his original plan to kill all Supes by releasing the virus, and Huey, who suddenly remembers he's supposed to be the main character of this show, finds out and follows him. Their final scene in Vought Tower is a very satisfying payoff. It's not even clear whether Butcher actually wants to do this. It seems more like he just has simply nothing to live for after completing his mission. But it doesn't matter if he wants to, because even if he didn't, he, Huey, and the audience all know that at some point, he will do it. He and Huey fight, and he gains the upper hand, because, obviously. However, he hesitates when he sees his younger brother Lenny in Huey's place, and Huey manages to shoot him. I love this moment, because it's likely that Butcher would not have gone through with it, at least in the moment, after being reminded of Lenny. However, Huey didn't know this, so he shot him anyways. That adds some level of Shakespearean tragedy to it. Plus, Butcher's final words, "You really are the spittin' of Lenny," act as the perfect button to he and Huey's relationship. Say what you will about the rest of the episode, but I don't have many notes on this section aside from that it probably just should have been given more time. Really, it has been built up to the entire series, but it is hilarious how little time there is between Butcher considering it and him doing it. It really does make it look like his dog died, and then he instantly decided he was going to kill everybody. That's about it, though. Huey and Annie have a kid in a world that they're finally willing to bring one into, Ryan gets adopted by the African-American community, and the Gen V cast drive a truck. Seriously, I didn't even watch that show, but I was still a little pissed off about how much those poor kids got ignored. This final season was a tumultuous one. There was a lot of unnecessary filler and confusing dialogue and story progression, but the character work and the satisfying ending made up for most of it. I appreciated seeing the darker, jaded sides of our more usually positive characters like Annie and MM, as well as the more human sides of our most despicable like Firecracker. And plus, while the absurdist charm of the boys isn't as strong as it once was, it is still there, which meant that none of these episodes were hard to sit through or anything. I was mostly entertained, and for that, this season gets a low 7 out of 10. Anyways, let's open IMDb and see what people thought of the finale. Huh. Yeah, okay. Y'all really did just decide to hate this before it was even out. It's hilarious, because when you see people on Twitter try to justify why they didn't like this episode, all they do is say shit like, "Why did Annie bring Deep to the water?" as if anybody actually cares. People compare it to Stranger Things as if those are even close. As I said, the boys had a bit of a cookie-cutter ending. However, Stranger Things couldn't even manage to be cookie-cutter. What we expected from these shows was a few character deaths, a big satisfying fight, and a reasonable conclusion to previously set up narratives. The boys gave us that. Stranger Things did not. I never made a follow-up to my first Stranger Things 5 video, but there's really not much to say that hasn't been said, and that's not what this video is about. Anyways, thank you for watching my commentary on The Boys Season 5, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye now.